Here's my presentation on my action research for ACTE 699. My name is Sarah Price. I am getting a Master's of Education in Assessment, Curriculum, and Teaching with an endorsement in STEM. I'm a 5th grade Science and Social Studies teacher in the Ephrata Area School District. The purpose of my action research was to assess the impact of the addition of movement to vocabulary words. Why did I decide to do this? Well, over the past couple of years, I've noticed that, especially in social studies, students tend to just memorize the vocabulary word and definition, but not really understand the meaning behind it or how to use it in context, or if they're reading an article and they see the word, they can't put 2 and 2 together. So vocabulary is an important foundation for student knowledge and understanding, especially in social studies. So I was looking to see if adding movement to vocabulary words in social studies made a difference in student knowledge and understanding of the word, especially because they are different and unique words that we don't always use in our vocabulary, especially in the 21st century. My research question for my action research was, what effect does adding gestures and movement to vocabulary words have on student knowledge and retention of the word? I was surprised at how much my literature review guided my research. Through reviewing related literature, I actually found a lot of good ideas and suggestions for how to conduct my research and different techniques I could use. So one of the articles that stuck out to me in my review of literature was the Greenfader and Brulette article. They stated that since 2007, almost 71% of United States schools have reduced or eliminated instructional time in subjects like art, music, history, and foreign language. This really was surprising to me because even though we focus on PSSA subjects like ELA and math, I do think that art, music, history, and foreign language make a well-rounded student. So I was surprised that 71% of schools have reduced or eliminated those subjects. So in their study, teachers use theater and dramatization of the word to teach the words to English language learners. Through engaging their imaginations in this way, it is suggested that children would increase their ability to comprehend the vocabulary word. Another piece of literature that really drove my action research was this article. In this article, the author suggested writing the vocabulary terms on flashcards and hold them up once the movement was established as a class. Then the students would use the cards as practice. Once students knew the motion, they said and showed the word. Students practiced it as a warm-up activity on a daily basis. They used pictures, magazines, and written flashcards to display the words each day. This article is really something, this technique is something that I really took for my own action research, and you will see that later. And then in the last article that I chose to review for my action research was a piece of literature by Hammett. She looked at the movement and classroom during read-aloud stories in a kindergarten and 1st grade, and it increased their vocabulary acquisition when they would put a movement with a vocabulary word during a read aloud. So essentially they were acting out the read aloud as she was reading it to them. The design of my study, well, first, students brainstormed as a class motions to add to the vocabulary words that are presented in our unit. The vocabulary words are in our textbook, so they're not words that I pick out. It's words that our curriculum and our textbook want us to know. My students did take a pre-test to assess their prior knowledge, and then they also took a post-assessment. They practiced for 15 minutes daily for 2 weeks or during our research break. And then I also did give them student surveys, but the data that I collected through my student surveys wasn't really anything much. Their opinions were really all over the place before and after we did the vocabulary and movement activity. So when I surveyed them prior to the study, I got a really weird mix of responses, and then the same thing happened after. So the student survey data wasn't really significant in any way to the study. The findings in my study. All students had showed growth. The average score on the pre-assessment was a 3 out of 8, which is 37.5%. Then the average score on the post-assessment was a 7 out of 8 points, which is 87.5%, which in my opinion is mastery. My district looks at mastery as 80% or higher. And then it was a 50% growth from pre to post assessment. Additionally, various styles of learning were addressed and used in the classroom during this research study, which I think positively impact the students participating in the study. So for example, with our motions and our vocabulary words and how they practiced, students were visually seeing the vocabulary word. They were saying it, so it was auditory, and then they were acting it out, so it was kinesthetic. So they were engaged in their learning in different learning styles, which I think is why I had such growth between the pre and post assessment, because normally students just get their list of vocabulary words and it's up to them to review and study. So having them practice in different ways that are meeting each different style of learning that's in my classroom, I think it really impacted them in a positive way, and obviously the results show that as well. Here are some images. These are two graphs from my pre to post assessment. So on the top is my pre-assessment. Google Forms creates a really nice visual on their assessment tools. So this is a graph showing how the points were distributed on my pre-assessment. So as you can see up here, the average was a 3.14 out of 8. The mean was 3 out of 8, and then you can just see how many students got each score. So several of them, about, I would say 14, got a 1 out of 8, and so on. And so I really like that they provide the bar graph for you, but they also calculate the average, the mean, and the range. And then on the bottom here is my post-assessment. So the average was a 6.99, which I rounded up to a 7 out of 8 points. The median was an 8 out of 8, and then the range was between 2 and 8 points. As you can see through the bar graph, this is a really nice visual of how many students scored an 8 out of 8. The y-axis actually changed from pre to post-assessment. So on the pre-assessment, it was between 0 and 15, and then on the post, it was between 0 and 50. So you can see through this, visual, that almost 50 out of 80 of my students scored an 8 out of 8 on the post-assessment. This is a visual of the flashcard, or one of the flashcards that I used with my students. My students had a total of 8 vocabulary words, and this was just one of them. And I wanted to walk you through the process on how we decided the motion, and then how it also applied as a context clue for the definition and the word. So for this motion, one of my students acted it out for us, and it's basically a frame. It's a hands that are in a rectangle shape. So students picked this because it's a frame, or it looks like a frame, but additionally, it also resembles Pennsylvania. So frames of government, the definition was William Penn's plan for the government of the Pennsylvania colony. So students thought it would be a really good idea to have it as a rectangle because it also looks like Pennsylvania, but it's also a frame. So through those context clues, they are able to piece the definition together just through a simple hand motion. Some conclusions and limitations in my study. One of the big limitations I found in my study is that students were practicing these vocabulary words daily. So that could have impacted the results of the post-assessment because students were exposed to the words a lot more frequently than I have done in the past. So that I think was the biggest limitation in my study, that I'm not 100% sure that the motions and the flashcards is what gave me such great results, or the repeated practice. But in conclusion, I did have positive results in my study. Students really enjoyed having ownership in their learning through deciding the motions for the vocabulary words. What did I learn through this project? I really learned how to analyze data and use it to drive my instruction. I know as a teacher that seems repetitive because we do that frequently, but I think through this course and this action research, I was really looking at my data and using it to drive my instructions instead of looking at it and maybe using it to drive my instruction, but still kind of going with what I've done in the past. And then how did this impact me as a teacher? One of the biggest things is that I realized that doing research in my classroom is not as complicated and hard as you may think it is. It seems really daunting at first, but after going through this whole process, I think that it's something that I can really adapt and use a lot more frequently. Obviously, I don't have to write a paper and do a presentation about it all of the time, but really using my student data and looking at the before and the after and seeing their growth through percentages and math equations and Excel and stuff like that. So doing it that way, I think, was a really neat way to see my student growth. And then they also liked seeing their growth as well through numbers. So that is all for my presentation for my action research. I hope you enjoyed, and I'm looking to hear your feedback. Thank you.